How the heck do you talk about Stanley Kubrick's The Shining in a video like this? Hello, and welcome to A Film a Day with Jordan Woodley. Day 40, and I can't think of a better sort of checkmark movie to do than Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. There are so many ways to approach this film. It is quite confounding where I even start. Frankly, this is... When you start with the master of horror storytellings, possibly one of his greatest novels, and it is directed by one of, if not the greatest filmmaker of the 20th century, you are going to end up with something that is layered and textured and truly there is a reason that this film gets turned over again and again and again. There are, I suppose the best way to look at it is generally in the horror genre, broadly to begin with. There are several schools of thought, although I will credit the YouTube channel Cinefix. They come up with lists and they sort of use them to analyse film culture. And they were talking about horror films. But they mention the fact that there are really 5 fundamental pillars of horror. 5 films that really are the foundations of modern horror films as we understand them. They are The Shining, The Exorcist, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Alien, and Halloween. Now, these don't have to be the greatest horror films ever made, but they are the foundations. There isn't anything that could be done in modern horror that isn't derived from these films in some way. And in regards to The Shining and what it does, and what Kubrick does, is create that sense of simultaneous claustrophobia and agoraphobia. Now that you'd think those would be impossible bedfellows. But he creates this sense of atmosphere. Even the opening moments of the film, where you have this sprawling landscape where you see just miles of trees and land, surrounding the Overlook Hotel. Then later in the film, as you're with Danny, you get the sense of long, endless corridors that, make the hotel have this greater sense of scale and size. You have the maze outside, which again creates this sense that, we're going to be lost and consumed by the hotel, just like Jack is over the course of the film. And so therefore, agoraphobia, because it is just endless space and atmosphere, whilst also claustrophobia, because there is no escape. There is no escaping the hotel. It's funny, really, because you'd think The Shining would have the same problem as I mentioned with Citizen Kane, that a film like this is so fundamental that really what is there left to say about it? Everything that it created has been told or used or parodied. I was aware of the film as a teenager from the Simpsons references or the allusions in other films. I mean, even most recently with Ready Player One, which has a whole sequence that is based around The Shining. And so you think, like with Citizen Kane, that when you finally watch the film, that you go, oh, well, I've seen this done this style, and I've seen this, and this has been done better by someone else. But frankly, I'm struggling to think of an example of filmmaking that even matches this atmosphere to it and this style of storytelling. The most amazing thing about The Shining is the fact that you can look at it again and again and again. You could read every essay that's written about the meanings behind The Shining, every video that someone makes, everything, and even then come up with new readings of the film based on, you know, contemporary understanding of, you know, gender relationships, child abuse, of even racial representations, or the representations of native cultures and their, you know, the underlying meaning for modern America. But the beauty of the film is it's one of those kaleidoscopes where you're constantly looking at it and seeing something different depending on who you are and what reading you're coming at it from. I remember, this is probably my third, perhaps fourth time that I've seen this film. I remember being a teenager and reading about it and thinking, oh, well, it's just about a man who tries to kill his family, he's crazy, and something to do with ghosts, and just not getting it. I remember being later on and seeing it and thinking it was an interesting film, but nothing to write home about. It was in my 20s when I watched it that I really started to get the sense of it. You know, my knowledge of filmmaking was a bit stronger, and I understood some of the horror, but even then, I got it, but I didn't love it. It is, in fact, this watch where I've really, really started to get a sense, you know, it struck me on this watch in a way that it hadn't on any of my previous watches, and I'm shaken by the fact that it could have such a profound effect on me on the third rewatch of the film. And so in that respect, you know, you can do things like examine the film from different perspectives. You know, if you looked at it, some people would choose to look at it from a Wendy Torrance perspective, that all the stuff about the ghosts, all the mythology, all of that is simply the product of psychosis, and that in fact it is simply the story of a man who with demons, who has a mental breakdown and tries to kill his family, and it is as simple as that, and everything else is just colouring for it. Then you have the version with Jack himself, where it's about a man trying to fight for his soul. That, you know, over the course of the film, he is trying to retain himself, and bit by bit, this hotel that might be a metaphor for hell, it might be a metaphor for the past, consumes him. So by the end, he is no longer a free man, he is part of the hotel. But then you have the reading from Danny's perspective, and this goes into crazy Stephen King multiverse levels of meaning, where, you know, that we are put in the mindset of Danny. That is to say, we are like a child who doesn't really understand the Overlook, doesn't understand, you know, that these corridors represent the greater universe, as it were. And in fact, you know, Stephen King loves his Eldritch Terror style things with It, with The Dark Tower, you know, that humans, there are humans like Danny who are these, you know, precognates who have a greater understanding of the universe, but, you know, muggles like us, we don't really understand, so we have to be explained in a very simple way, like Dick Halloran does to Danny. And that, in fact, the Overlook, the whole system of spirits and, you know, consumption and the hotel's will is, in fact, something just beyond our conception as human beings. yes, that's the craziest reading of it, and yes, I'm very conscious that that goes into, like I say, mad Stephen King, you know, it territory. But as I say, you can make that reading of it. As I was watching this, I was thinking about the fact, you know, smaller readings, like the fact that, you know, the all work and no play scene that everyone knows, even if you've never even seen a second of The Shining, might be an indication that the hotel always had Jack. From the moment he stepped in, the hotel consumed him, and all the stuff where he's being shown visions are kind of irrelevant because the hotel took control of him from that moment. I was thinking about Wendy, and I was thinking about the fact that what if there's a reading where when she hits him with the bat and knocks him down the stairs, that actually he's been, you know, he's dead from that point on in the film, and that in fact the hotel is puppeteering him from that point on. I was thinking about maybe, and again, this is me just spouting off about crazy theories about this film, but there was one reading I had towards the end, and it's the idea that maybe the hotel couldn't claim Jack. Let me rephrase it. What if Jack was always the protagonist, as Stephen King had intended, and the thing that he hates about the film is the fact that Jack is not a sympathetic character, that, you know, the way he's portrayed is as, you know, he's kind of weird and sinister from point one, and he only gets worse from there. But what if the story is in fact him trying to fight for his soul, and him trying to not let the hotel consume him, but it does over the course of the film. And in fact, the hotel doesn't want Wendy or Danny at all. They are like casualties of, you know, of it, but they aren't really the thing the hotel wants. The hotel always wanted Jack. And when Jack kills Dick, that's the point in which the hotel has him. And so when he freezes to death at the end, that's the hotel consuming him. And that's why you never see Wendy and Danny after that. They drive off, story's over for them. That the story was always Jack's, and it was always about this hotel consuming him, but it needed a blood sacrifice, and it doesn't matter who it was. It's that kind of stuff that really gets me sort of my mind whirling, because I love that kind of storytelling. The idea that I could watch this another time and say, oh, actually, scratch all the things I've said now, I've got a completely new reading. I think if you look at Wendy as a character, I think Wendy's a lot stronger of a character than people give her credit for, that people always think of the bathroom scene. But in fact, as I said, Wendy hits him with a bat, and then when he tries to, you know, after the here's Johnny scene and he's reaching in, she stabs him in the hand. You know, Wendy, there is definitely a reading on Wendy that I really would love to have on another viewing. I just didn't. I was really hyper-focused on Jack. And I just think it's a phenomenal film that even to this day, I can see why its influence stretches over half a century, almost. Because it is such an evocative film. In a previous video, I was talking about Claudia Gordman and the idea of sound and the 5 fundamentals of sound. 7 fundamentals of sound. And I really think that Stanley Kubrick masters that. He uses music and sound to influence the audience, you know, shock them or stir them or put them on edge in a way that means you don't get to relax, in the same way as the framing does, that it shrinks you down and makes you feel lost in the hotel, but the sound also creates this subliminal tension throughout the film. I genuinely think this is a masterpiece and possibly one of the greatest films. It's definitely one of the greatest films I've ever seen. and I can't believe it's taken me this viewing. I'm aware that I already loved Stanley Kubrick as a filmmaker. Clockwork Orange is just phenomenal. I got to see 2001: A Space Odyssey in the cinema year before last, and I think that is one of the greatest films ever made. But I think, and I wish I could see The Shining in the cinema, because I think Stanley Kubrick is the primary example of a filmmaker whose films you need to see and experience in the cinema. And the more modern technology has gotten, the more it's enhanced the work that he's put into it. So as you can tell, I'm a little overwhelmed and quite energized by my experience of the film. I'm looking forward to tomorrow when I watch the documentary Room 237 and seeing the meanings behind the film, and I'm hoping that whatever I have to say won't simply be sort of me doing the same thing as I do here. Who knows? But I'll see you then. See you again. Take care.